Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. What is that? Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near.
Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world. Or, as we say in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. We're glad to have you with us. UUCS is a very welcoming congregation, and we appreciate your unique experiences, backgrounds, beliefs, and lifestyle. If you're one of our longtime members, or have been with us a short time, or if you're joining us today for the very first time, we're very glad to have you with us. We are also very grateful for those of you who are streaming the service today. We are delighted to have you with us as well. And it is my pleasure to welcome our guest speaker this morning, Kacy Telleson. He's the author of Freaks of a Feather. In his guest sermon today, he'll be reading from his book and hosting a Q&A session. His book, by the way, is available for purchase in the back, which I purchased one. A little word of warning, some of us up here had a little bit of a hard time keeping it together, but you know, that's okay, because it's sort of an emotional topic. But as I told Deb, it's okay because we're all just in here being humans and doing our human thing and having our human feelings, so it's all good, in my opinion. A few announcements. Our Unity candle has been lit at the front of our sanctuary, and that's something we do when one of our members has passed away. Longtime church member Mary Monroe passed away on Tuesday after having recently fallen ill and after a brief stay in the hospital. And we will let you know when her memorial service is scheduled. So please keep Mary's family in your thoughts at this time. We also want to remind you that our annual meeting is coming up next Sunday, June 5th, after services, and we need a quorum, so we encourage you to please attend, especially if you're a voting member of the congregation. And if you have any questions about this year's proposed budget, which will be voted on during the meeting, a member of the Board of Trustees, I think wearing a red name tag, hopefully. Okay, I'm getting a nod. Will be available after the service to answer any questions you have. All right, so now please take a moment to greet one another and be sure to say hello to someone that you haven't met yet. I'll have to pitch in if you need it. done the sermon a couple
I'm going to interrupt now because we need to sing happy birthday to the person standing at the podium. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Shane. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Yeah. If you're wondering, I'm 40 today. I know. All right. Well, thank you, and we'll have more time to greet each other and share during the social hour after the service. There's coffee in the back if you want to help yourself when the service is over, and yeah, okay. So we now turn from our informal greeting of one another to formally begin our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, the symbol of our unity and solidarity, of our openness and inclusion, of our community and individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. May it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt where it has been found. Our opening reflection is a blessing by Andre Moll called "All That We Share is Sacred." As we gather together, may we remember, when you share with me what is most important to you, that is where listening begins. When I show you that I hear you, when I say your life matters, that is where compassion begins. When I open the door to greet you, that is where hospitality begins. When I venture out to bring you to shelter, that is where love begins. When I risk my comfort to ease your suffering, when I act against hatred, violence, and injustice, that is where courage begins. When we experience the full presence of each other because of our shared humanity, because of our differences, that is where holy gratitude begins. May this space be a table that is not complete until all are welcome. May this table be a space of beauty where together we create a series of miracles, and where all that we share is sacred. May it be so.
Our first in-service hymn of the morning is number 133, One World. Please stand as you're willing and able. One world, this for all its sorrow. One world, shaping one tomorrow. One humanity, though riven. We to whom a world is given. From one
We will now kindle our candles of care. Each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those who are with us in our minds and hearts, and who we want to wrap in our love and care. We haven't gotten any specific mentions, but I'm sure a lot of us are thinking about those suffering from the war in Ukraine and all those affected by that, as well as the victims of the recent shootings. So let's share a moment in silence, embracing others who are here and here in our hearts and minds this morning. You're welcome to say their names aloud as you're willing. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering elsewhere in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion. We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission to the larger world.
It's now our time for all ages, so I invite all the children up to the front. If you'd like to join me, come on down. And while they're making their way up front, I have a couple of pictures to share with everybody. Kids, do you recognize this? Max, you do. This is our playground in the backyard, right? Right in the backyard of UUCS, we have a playground, and it has been loved for many, 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 many years. It's been loved so much that I think it's time for a new one. As you can see in this next picture, the tire swing is so far down to the ground that you can't even swing in it. And the monkey bars take you right into that wall. And so over the next few weeks, you'll be hearing from me and some of our children, and you'll be reading in The Sun about some fundraising opportunities that the kids are putting together so that we can replace this old playground with something new. And we're interested in making this investment because throughout the summer, we will be having what's called a Let's Grow Play Club. Ta-da! So this is a multi-age, unstructured playtime for kids where there is minimal adult intervention. The kids are getting wide-eyed about that. And it really allows kids to do what they do best, which is play, which is so important for their development. And I could go on and on, I won't. I don't think we allow for enough play in today's society. So we're going to get a new playground, and we need some adult supervisors. And remember, I said it's minimal intervention, so it's the easiest way that you could volunteer at our church. You can sign up with a friend, have a cup of coffee outside, and be there in case a true emergency arises. So look in The Sun, find me after the service, and find out ways to get involved. And now it's time for our story. This is adapted from a story called Honoring Fallen Soldiers by Erica A. Hewitt and Paul Sawyer. Think of where you feel safe and at peace. For people in the United States military, there's a special signal that says, "You're okay, you're at peace." It's a melody called taps, and it's only 24 notes long. It was composed by a general in the Civil War and his bugler. It's hard to remember how important bugle calls were in the military once upon a time. In the days before radio, bugle calls were the only way that military units could communicate to groups over a large area. In the 1860s, the end of the day was really important. If there was time and peace enough to play taps, that was a signal that the camp was relatively safe. To a camp of soldiers, the notes of taps meant that unless you were on duty, you could close your eyes and sleep in peace. They say that the first time taps was played at a memorial service for fallen soldiers also took place during the Civil War. In those days, the traditional military salute was, as it still is, the firing of 3-round volley of rifles. But this one time, as the memorial service began to take shape, the soldiers thought that maybe sounding the artillery salute might be taken as a call to fight. Someone had the idea of sounding a bugle instead. Taps came to mean the same thing. It meant the safe and quiet end to the day, time to rest, time to turn your lights out, to let your eyes close, and as best as you could, to be at peace. Let's listen to it. This weekend, many people in the U.S. are remembering and honoring all those who have died while serving in our military. So you might hear taps again. If you do, maybe you can stop what you're doing and think of every soldier who might have been afraid, and then let taps remind you of peace. And now, we'll sing our children out through our tears.
As we move into a time of meditation, find a comfortable position. Close your eyes if you wish. Take a deep breath in. Breathe out as you reflect on these words from the Iliad. No one can hurry me down to Hades before my time, but if a man's hour is come, be he brave or be he coward, there is no escape for him when once he has been born. Our reading this morning comes from Ryan Holiday from his book, Courage is Calling. We think courage means being unbreakable. Nah, It means getting back up when you've been broken, because your kids are watching, because the cause needs you, because you won't let evil triumph. It means putting yourself back together so you can do what needs to be done, for yourself, for others. But some of us are afraid to do that, not afraid to keep going, but afraid to be vulnerable enough to admit we're wounded, that we need repair, that we've been dealt a setback. In one of Hemingway's most beautiful passages, he writes, "If people bring so much courage to this world, the world has to kill them to break them, so of course it kills them. The world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places. But those that will not break, it kills. It kills the very good and the very gentle and the very brave impartially." Will you find a way to become stronger at the broken places, or will you so cling to your old ways that you will be shattered? A hero gets back up. They heal, they grow for themselves and others. Audie Murphy concludes his memoir with this idea. He has been damaged by war. He knew it. He has seen things he shouldn't have to see. Like many veterans and trauma survivors, he has PTSD, but he decides that this will not define him. "Suddenly, life faces us," he writes. "I swear to myself that I will measure up to it. I may be branded by war, but I will not be defeated by it."
I am waiting for the silence. I am waiting for the dawn. I am often found in reverence, though from many sources drawn. It is not mine to fight for justice, for it will not be won this day. I am peace, and I am waiting for the lost to find their way. You'll not find me set in judgment of the vain or of the weak, but I rise to meet the weary with the solace that they seek. Still I have not fed the hungry, nor strewn wealth among the poor. I am peace, and bring but mystery, and the patience to endure. I am found among the seasons, autumn's death and spring's rebirth. As relentless their momentum as the turning of the earth. All are welcome in my presence, for only love can conquer hate. I am peace, and for the harvest I have planted and will wait.
Okay, well, our guest speaker this morning is Kacy Telleson. Kacy was raised in Spokane, Washington, a small farming community on the edge of the Palouse. Kacy joined the Marine Corps Infantry directly out of high school and deployed twice to Iraq from 2005 to 2009. He currently lives in Spokane with his wife and 2 children, and he attends Gonzaga University of Law. His work has appeared in the New York Times, Task and Purpose, The War Horse, Leatherneck Magazine, literary journals, and the Softlete website. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome Kacy.
Everybody hear me all right? Okay. I was originally going to read something different for today. It was going to be a talk about the moral corrosiveness of war, but this being Memorial Day, I thought it more appropriate that I read about some of my friends. I apologize in advance if I get a little emotional. This is a kind of a rough weekend for me. But first, I'd like to read the dedication out of the book. It says, "This book is for Melissa, my wife and constant reader, and for the fallen who stood in my place so that I can watch my babies grow." This chapter is called Alonzo. A name is more than how we know a person, place, or thing. Names have power. Names carry weight. It's who you are, condensed into a few syllables. To some people, Carl carries the weight of abuse. To others, Carl represents pure love. Mary could be the succubus who stole your life, or the saint that saved your soul. A name can change, and its owner might be able to shed the weight of it, but the name always remains. And all who hear its utterance are forced to remember the good and the bad. Of course, there is always the risk of being branded with a nickname, a name on top of a name. My older brother was the master of demeaning nicknames. He replaced Kacy with Fatty McFatstuff. Fortunately, the nickname was too complicated to stick, so it quickly faded into the wood paneling of our double-wide trailer. Later, he came up with the nickname Dooley. Initially, I thought that sounded pretty good. There are worse things than being named after a big truck. Once he saw my pride in the new name, he informed me that Dooley referred to my two distinct chins. After that, I hated the name, but still, it stuck. My mom called me Kacy, everyone else called me Dooley. In the Marines, your name was immediately reduced to your last name. There were no more Carls, Erics, or Jims. Kacy was nowhere to be found. There were only Smiths, Johnsons, Kowalskis, Changs, Torreses, and a lone Telleson. In Iraq, when I heard someone's first name for the first time, there was a weird ring to it. I knew who the speaker was talking about, but it just sounded wrong. When I met Alonzo, I never bothered to ask his first name. I didn't think we needed them anymore. Alonzo never really talked to me until after he got shot at. I think he wanted to know if this Telleson was the real thing or another coward who had slipped through the cracks of boot camp. I passed his test. Though emotionally immature, I was no coward. After that first firefight, we were as good as brothers. Not brothers in the sense of knowing each other's every secret, but brothers in the sense that we would die 1,000 times for one another. Something not quite quantifiable happens between people in combat. There is a kind of invisible chain that connects the two souls. As much as I hated and loved my flesh and blood brothers, I hated and loved my combat brothers. About a week into this newfound brotherhood, Alonzo got orders to go to another squad. It was the worst. All of us hated it. We were all just starting to act like a squad. But Alonzo, being the Marine that he was, just smiled and said, "It's all good." The next day I saw him driving a Humvee outside the wire. Alonzo refused to change squad bays and kept sleeping in our room. It was the only thing in the whole situation that made us feel better. The brief moments we had together were nothing but jokes and complaining about how much worse the other guy had it. The morning of November 20th, 2006, my squad was scheduled to move out to a small patrol base. Alonzo had a few hours off and watched us get ready. He made a few jokes about sleeping in and taking the day off. As I was walking out the door, he asked, "Hey man, you got smokes? I'm out." I dug through my filthy pockets, moving my toothbrush and half-full bag of Swedish fish, before grabbing an unopened box of cancer sticks. I threw him the red and white pack of Marlboros. It was from my private stock of Washington cigarettes, with the tax stamp to prove it. He smiled, but there was something behind it, some kind of apprehension or sadness. He looked me in the eyes and shook his head. "Love you, Kacy." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know he knew my first name. I just smiled awkwardly back and said, "Love you too." I didn't know his first name. A couple days later, we were sitting around a small fire at a patrol base on the edge of the city, smoking cigarettes and eating what little junk food we could get our hands on. I made an inappropriate joke to the large Marine next to me and closed my eyes and braced for the punch I was sure was coming. But it never came. I closed my eyes and waited. Far away, there was an explosion, its sound muffled by our patrol base's thick walls. All we had to do, though, was look up. A black column of smoke reached toward the heavens like an accusatory dark finger pointed at God. We all ran to the highest point of the patrol base. The explosion was at the far side of the city. I knew it wasn't Alonzo. He couldn't die. I ran back down to the radio, listened, waiting to hear which one of us was now gone. Excuse me. Through the static and the panicked voices, I pieced together that a Humvee had run over a massive improvised explosive device. It took too long for them to read off the names of the boys who had been hit. I knew of the first Marine, Warner. He was dead. The second was Davenport. I never knew Warner well, but I knew Davenport. He was a shy kid, a kid with a huge heart, a kid that I thought didn't belong here. Most of us fit the bill. We were stereotypical ruffians, but not Davenport. He had a legitimate, gentle soul, and he shouldn't have been here, behind a machine gun. The next burst of static cryptically told of a wounded Marine. Severe leg trauma, a medevac had been called. It was Alonzo. The radio static turned to white noise. This wasn't how this was supposed to work. We were supposed to have a few close calls that we could spin into yarns once we were old men. We couldn't tell stories if we were dead. That wasn't how this was supposed to work. But if you lost a leg, you'd still be alive. We could still sit on a porch one day and marvel at the badasses we once were. The radio sat silently as those of the patrol base looked at each other. Everyone's faces were filled with rage, sadness, or terror. Some held all three. I don't know what mine looked like. The radio came back to life. Alonzo was dead. The black smoke still hung heavy in the sky, indifferent and undeniable. They were gone. Joshua C. Alonzo, Heath D. Warner, and James R. Davenport. Thank you very much. I thought I was going to make it through that the whole time, but faltered there at the end. Now we're going to have a Q&A session, so if anybody has any questions about the book or the writing process or anything at all, please feel free to ask.
Didn't mean to creep up on you there.
That's all right.
Is this, yeah, we're good? Okay. One thing I want to mention is make sure you speak, bring the mic close, relatively close to your face and speak loud and clearly. And also, I didn't mention that we were doing the Q&A. I don't know if you were all a little bit unprepared for that. I did mention it in the first service. But if you need a second to think of a question, I'll ask a question first. What initially attracted you about the Marines? What was appealing about it? Why did you want to do it?
Well, I think you're a little kid and you see them in their uniforms, you're just in awe, you know. Like just, you think about the discipline that it takes just to put on a uniform like that in the morning, I was just in awe. And then you read stories of, you know, World War II and even before that, and they just seemed larger than life, you know, seemed like real life superheroes.
Other questions?
Hi, Kacy. I loved the book. I couldn't put it down for the 2 days it took me to read it. So I was thinking, like, it takes, like, what, 3 or 4 months to become a soldier. And if you could be in charge, what kind of training and how long would it take to prepare soldiers to go back to just being dads and civilians?
I think that's one of the great questions that people have been grappling with, you know, since, you know, Vietnam. Like, how do we, probably forever, you know, all the way back to the Iliad. I'm sure people had difficulty transitioning. I think it could start with just the preparation, because what they teach you and what the Marine Corps is excellent at is teaching you to go to war. and they're excellent at that. I think they're probably the best at it. You know, they really, I don't want to say it's a cult, but it's pretty close. But I think if they could give us some tools to realize that it goes on after this, this isn't the end. This is just a small chapter in your life, and you need to carry the positive with you into the next chapter of your life, but don't let your service define you. You know, don't peak at 19. So I think just letting them know that, yeah, the military service is a very, you know, profound experience, but this is just one experience and one chapter in your life. Carry it with you and just keep moving forward.
Thanks. Other questions? Oh.
Kacy, I'm a Vietnam War veteran. And,
The hearing impaired can't hear you.
okay. I'd like you to talk about the moral implications of sending our young to war.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, that was what I was originally going to speak on. I think the gist of it is one of the themes of my book is that we're all susceptible to outside influences, you know, and you can go into a situation and think that you have a moral compass that's stronger than others. But the reality is there's very few people on this planet that can withstand the moral corrosion that happens in war. I thought prior to going in that I was one of the people that could stand steady against it, but it became too much for me, and you know the darkness kind of crept in, and it changed me fundamentally. You know, I think that the moral implications for war is that I believe that war can be just, and there can be just reasons for fighting. But I believe that the moral implications are that if we're going to send our young to go fight, we have to make sure it's a just cause, and I'm not sure that always happens.
George Taylor, thank you, and thank you for your service, and I don't say that lightly because I'm a U.S. Navy combat veteran. And when I say thank you for your service, it's not simply the cashier at the grocery counter saying thank you for your service. Thank you for bearing the burdens that you've just shared with us today. But my question is, for Alonzo and the others that you shared your grief about, I share with you a question that Cindy Sheehan, a generation ago, asked George W. Bush at his ranch, and I happened to be present at that demonstration, where Cindy Sheehan asked George W. Bush, for what noble cause did my son Kacy die in Iraq? So I would ask you, a veteran of Iraq, how would you answer Cindy Sheehan's question? For what noble cause did Alonzo die?
I would say that being a fellow 19-year-old with Alonzo, there was no global cause for us. You know, global cause was a secondary or tertiary thought for us. The only thing that mattered to us was each other. And I think that if she were to ask me that, I would say that Alonzo died for me and he died for his friends. I know that's not what people want to hear, but you know, a 19-year-old Marine, he doesn't care what the politics are. He gets told where to go and he goes. For right or wrong, that's just the way it is. We have a playback feature. No, it was just that I would say that Alonzo died for me and he died for his friends, and I would say that for a 19-year-old Marine, there is no global cause. You know, there is the fight in front of him and there's his friends, and he may years later reflect on why he was there and he may grapple with that, but in the moment he's fighting for his friends, and that's, you know, for right or wrong, that's just the way it is.
Hello, my name is Joy Luck. I'm not a vet, but my husband is a...
Use the microphone.
I want to sing now. Anyway, my husband was a Vietnam vet. My dad was a decorated pilot in the Second World War. I'm an RN, and I worked on a Marine base, and I loved it. I got to know a lot about our service people doing that. But I'm a writer, and my question to you is, when did you start writing? I love your writing.
So the first piece of this book came a little over 10 years ago. I was enrolled at the, well, I guess the very first piece was I kind of started this book as kind of a long suicide note, to be completely honest. And I was just going to tell the story, and then so people knew. But once I started the writing process, it was very cathartic for me. And I just fell in love with writing again, reading. And so the first actual piece was just chicken scratch on a yellow legal pad. But eventually I enrolled at Eastern Washington, and I had a great professor, Rachel Tour was her name. She's kind of one of my personal heroes. But I wrote the first piece, which was about an incident in the palm groves, and kind of just wrote it as on a standalone thing, kind of a detached, you know, it was a very close first-person narrative with no real reflection on anything. And from there, I just started building little pieces around it. So the whole writing process took me a little over 10 years to put this book together.
One other question. You're going into law. What kind of law are you interested in?
What she's asking, what kind of law he wants to pursue, because he's at Gonzaga Law right now.
Well, the main objective is to not be poor. That's number one. So I'll really do whatever law I can get a job at. The stuff I gravitate towards now is kind of land use property stuff, which I find pretty interesting. I think there's only about 6 or 7 nerds in the state that like that stuff, so maybe there'll be a job opening.
Hi, thank you for sharing. She actually asked my question pretty much. I did just want to say I find the tie-in of the, you know, your brother's nickname at the start, and then the you know, last names and not knowing the first names. That was incredibly poignant, and I don't know where my question is precisely, but I really appreciated that, and also I can tell, you know, the cathartic nature of what you do, and it really seems like it's reaching other people. And I'm wondering, do you ever encourage other veterans or people with trauma or who have experience with suicidality, do you encourage them to express themselves in a similar way?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the first things I suggest to people that are struggling is I think that if allowed, these stories, if they're just stuck in your head, they can be overwhelming because you can't, they're just bouncing off the gray matter in there. You know, you can't really make sense of anything. And I think that even if no one ever reads it, there's a lot of power to putting down your story in a linear fashion from start to finish. Because I think you're able to detach from it, get it out of your head, and then look at it with a little bit of space. And then you can hopefully try to make sense of it and see that this is just one story and that you're not that story, you're something more.
Thanks for reading this morning, Kacy. I just wanted to follow up on your response to one of the earlier questions when you said that war fundamentally changed you. Could you, it seems like a kind of very in-depth question, but I don't know if you could speak a little bit more to that, and then the incorporation of that moving forward. Like especially for, I mean, I was in the military for a little bit, but I was never at combat, so I don't have that understanding. One of the things I always like ruminate on in my writing is that you're a different person. You know, even depending on the certain time of day, if you haven't had your lunch yet, you're a different person than after you've eaten your lunch. You know, and then, you know, the kid you were that signed up, the bright-eyed kid that was romantic and had these ideas on what they thought war was and what they thought military service was, that's going to be a very different person that comes out of the backside of a combat deployment. And you're going to be someone who has stared reality in the face, and you have stared the, you know, maybe the feral nature of who we are as people in the face, and you kind of, for better or worse, you think you have answers that other people don't have, you know. And I think that even everyday living, you know, 4 years goes by, you're a different person. And I think that what a combat deployment is it's like the great distillation of life. You live a whole lifetime in those 7 months. So you know, successes, failures, losses, heartbreak, you know, everything someone would experience over a whole lifetime, you'll experience in 7 months, you know, multiple times over. And it leaves a mark.
I want to share with you, I'm a retired city planner, and I spent about a dozen years part-time as a land use hearing officer, so I admire your passion for following law in that area. I wish you great success. My question is something that all of us hear about. is PTSD. Can you address that, maybe how broad and widespread that is, and whether you felt you had that, and maybe how you dealt with it, if you had felt that that was something that affected you, but in general, and then specifically for yourself, if you can, please.
Well, I think that the nature of the past conflicts is that it's actually a very small percentage of people who are in combat. It takes 15 support personnel to support one grunt on the ground. So the number of people that will actually see combat is actually very small. But that doesn't mean that people who don't actually serve in combat can't carry around trauma, because I think one thing that I didn't really think about when I was younger, and I was a little hot-headed, because I used to think that if you weren't in it, you don't get to talk. You know, that was essentially what my feelings were. But I think that there's a lot of, like myself, I have a lot of survivor's guilt. You know, I have a lot of, why not me? You know, why them and not me? And then you do the gymnastics in your head where you think that, you know, these people, you elevate them after they're gone, you know, whether they deserve it or not. And I think that maybe sometimes the people that weren't in combat can carry around that survivor's guilt too, because they weren't actually in the fight. But I think PTSD is real. Maybe it's not as widespread as, you know, it's made to seem in the public. I mean, it's a very specific thing, and I think that I don't want to take away from it at all, but I think that it's probably a blanket term that's used too often. And as for myself, I don't know. It's hard to put labels on things. I know that I struggled transitioning, and it's hard to live a life like that and then go to normalcy. That's what I struggled with a lot. And you lose your tribe of people that you were with, this tight-knit group that you formed all these bonds with, and you shared this kind of sacred moment with, and they're gone. And you know, as the years go by, the distance gets farther, and then you feel more isolated. And I think a lot of it is, you know, transition stress and isolation and survivor's guilt, and maybe that's all wrapped up in PTSD, but I don't think I'm smart enough to figure it out.
Hi, I'm Justin, former Air Force. I'd just like to point out, this is not a question, but just a statement that we do have a place in Spokane that helps people with PTSD. There's a place called the Veterans Garage. There's a psychologist there by the name of Dr. Pollack who deals with PTSD, so he's pretty well booked up, but it might be an option for many of those who are actually suffering. Thank you. So the Vets Garage.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's called the Vets Garage, and I believe Owen is also involved with that. So if you're curious, that might be a good resource. Other questions?
My mother's family, of course, my dad and his two brothers, and then my mom's 7 out of 9 brothers were in World War II. One was killed in the Pacific. I think all but 2 of them were overseas out of that group. And I always grew up with the feeling that there was a lot of pride involved, and that, you know, it was a just war. But as my mother aged, she became very resentful that all of those nice young men went off, and as she said, many of them were ruined. And she was very angry at the military complex, and she felt like those in power see it as a way to advance and get more stuff on their shoulders, sleeves, or wherever you put those badges, and that it was all about them and them thinking that what they were doing was, it advanced them at the expense of all of her brothers.
Yeah, I think if there was a just war, you know, in our nation's history, I think World War II was probably it. I mean, you can read a couple books that really affected me. There's one of them is The Rape of Nanking, about what the Japanese did to the Chinese, and you know, one of the several, you know, Auschwitz memoirs you could pick up, and you could realize that, you know, there's a time to stand up and do something, and that was one of them. I think that, you know, what you said is not completely false, and that does go on, but there are just wars.
Let's do one more, if there is one more.
Thank you for sharing part of your story. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your family supported you as you were transitioning out of service and perhaps as you were writing your story or your book, and also if you could share anything about any support that your family had or resources that your family had, or if you feel like there maybe is a gap there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I first got out, no one helped me with my transition because I didn't allow anyone to help me. I think that was one of the main things. I had isolated myself, and I wasn't going to tell anyone about it, and I wasn't going to. I felt very greedy over these stories. Like I felt people didn't deserve to hear them, because they didn't experience it. So I created this distance with everyone, and that was a big part of the transition problems because you just become more and more isolated. Like I mentioned already, it was writing that really saved me, and I think that, it's difficult with all of our distractions with phones and all that stuff, but a daily journaling practice for anyone will be helpful, to get your monkey mind out of your head and onto the page, I think is always going to be a successful thing. As far as for transitioning veterans too, I think that the one thing I could have done a better job of is there was no communication on my end, so my wife I'm sure she took my anger and rage as just me being a jerk when I was really just trying to, not as an excuse, but I was really dealing with some things. And had I communicated with my family better, I think it just would have went smoother. So I encourage veterans to, I think one of the main things is to keep in contact with your old friends and to talk to them as much as you can. And hopefully you got one that lives closer, but everyone's a phone call away. And just to share stories and try to keep that community alive.
Okay, I'll bookend it with another question for me. Is there a movie that you think does a particularly good job displaying what a soldier's life is like, what it's like to be in the military?
I think one of the best representations of the Marine Corps is a HBO or miniseries called Generation Kill. It was a book that really gets you into the more humorous side and just it's more real, But as far as like the Pacific, that's fantastic. Saving Private Ryan, all those are fantastic. But if you want to capture the essence of the Marine Corps, I think the best movie that did that is Generation Kill.
Thank you, Kacy.
Mm-hmm.
Our closing hymn is number 159. This is my song. Please rise as you're able to do so.
Our closing words today, I'm very short. Our closing words today come from Holly Neer. Something happens to me when I witness someone's courage. They may not know I'm watching, and I might not let them know, but something happens to me that will last me for a lifetime, to fill me when I'm empty and rock me when I'm low. Amen, blessed be, salam alaikum, and shalom.